Shameless plug, we would all love you to join and become members of the U.S. Green Building Council. I had actually the good fortune when I was in college of working for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Now, bear with me on this. And Colonial Williamsburg had historic interpreters, and we would give tours, and it was actually a great way to learn about American history. But at about this time of day, we would typically give what I would characterize as the chamber pot tour, because people had had so much rich information that they really wanted more to be entertained. So I'm going to endeavor not to just entertain you, but hopefully share a few things that you might be able to use. But I recognize that I'm the only person who's standing between you and cocktails. So here we go. Let's see if I can drive this now. So I'd like to start with context. In the context of CO2 emissions, buildings are the bad boys on the block. Not industry, not transit. People like to talk a lot about cars, but it's buildings. And about 40% of all CO2 emissions come from buildings in the U.S. And as Inez pointed out, CO2 emissions aren't the only impact. Buildings use 12% of all water. They generate 65% of all waste to landfill, and they consume 71% of all electricity. And unlike cars, buildings last for a very long time. So if you look at the building stock today in the U.S., we have about 400 billion square feet of existing buildings. And of that 400 billion, about 50 billion square feet will be demoed and won't be replaced in the next 20 years. And of the 20, where's the right way to point? I'm sort of having down this way. So I'll use my left hand. Ah, that works. Of the 200 billion square feet that remain, approximately 150 billion, whoops, I need to learn how to drive here. Approximately 150 billion square feet will be completely renovated, and 3 or 4 major systems will be completely retrofit. And then if the market turns around, or I should say when the market turns around, I am in construction after all, another 200 billion square feet will be built. So if you look at this stack, we have an opportunity over the next 20 years to influence about 80% of the built environment. And what we do in that time frame will have an impact that will last for generations. So, USGBC. How many of you guys have heard of the U.S. Green Building Council? Show of hands. Ooh, this is a good crowd. This is great. I have a chance to drink so much green Kool-Aid that sometimes I forget that people in the industry outside of the building and construction industry really aren't that aware of what the USGBC does. In this month's Harvard Business Review, actually it's November's Harvard Business Review that just came out, there was an article on for-benefit enterprise. For-benefit enterprise. And I think that this is a great description of what USGBC has come over the last 15, 17 years. But in 1993, the U.S. Green Building Council was founded by 3 businessmen, I think that's an important distinction, as a nonprofit NGO. And now it is the 3rd largest environmental NGO in the U.S. They recognize the need for market transformation. And among other questions, when they were founding the organization, they asked, why, if we know the nutritional value of a 50-cent box of animal crackers, do we know so very little about $50 million buildings? So LEED was born, and LEED was born to provide the market with a common language. It isn't just a point game. It was really intended to provide a platform across which we could have a dialogue. It identified tools like LEED that allowed strategies for improvement to be developed. And it also developed processes, there we go, to document achievements so that we could celebrate the incremental improvements. And those of us in the industry now, LEED is sort of ubiquitous. We all sort of take it for granted in a way, but just 10 years ago in 2000, 2001, when LEED was just first rolling out, we had none of this. We had no basis to engage in a dialogue. So LEED became the tool through which the U.S. Green Building Council could transform the market. So today, more than ever, since all of you are in the corporation business, you have major organizations, or you wouldn't be here as the executive user group, you're looking at your corporate responsibility and whether you're measuring energy or water, or whether you're looking at how you develop and maintain your buildings. After all, we're in the business of producing whatever we're producing. And so more than ever, the conversation around social responsibility isn't a conversation for tree huggers. It really is a conversation about value. So some of you all are familiar with the LEED rating system. This is actually an image from our offices at the Empire State Building. And I want to tell a little bit of a story about that, because I think that it begins to demonstrate value at the building scale. Internally, Skanska had made a commitment to build out all of our space to LEED Gold or better. And at the Empire State Building, we decided that we were going to take a stand. Actually, there was some very interesting internal horse trading that took place in order to get our senior leadership to say, yes, we will demonstrate the corporate bravery, we will walk the talk, and we will build the space out to LEED Platinum, which is the highest level of performance within the LEED rating system. But the deal was that we couldn't spend any more money to improve the space initially than would pay off over the life of the lease. So the return on the investment had to return over the 15-year lease. The original deal, by the way, was that it was to cost no additional money, but Skanska has done a lot of analyses for the federal government and others about the economic ramifications of building green, and we knew that that was not a bet that we wanted to assume. But this is where we are today. So after 3 years, just about 3 years in the space, the energy savings compared to the space that we were in previous to this on Madison Avenue is 57%. So we're tracking at a 57% energy savings. And what that means is that we have a return on investment in less than 5 years. And we're tracking diligently toward that. So for the $250,000 that we dropped in making this building or fitting out our space, because it's just the space that we occupy, fitting it out to LEED Platinum, we're actually going to pocket $500,000 over the life of the lease, and that's real money, especially in a narrow margin business. And there's another part of the story that I think is really interesting. Skanska brand is very important to us, and one of the reasons that we decided to pursue LEED is because it not only is it something that we provide to our clients in terms of building LEED buildings, but it reflects the brand. And in this little photograph, you have the CEO of the U.S. Green Building Council, who is on the right, handing the plaque to our team, and the 2 guys that flanked me that actually did all the hard work. But the tallest guy in that picture, who's standing just next to Rick Fedrizzi, the CEO of the U.S. Green Building Council, is Tony Malkin, who owns the Empire State Building. Well, he was really interested in what we were doing here because he felt that this would create a test example that would embolden other potential tenants to say, hey, look, if these guys can do it on essentially a modest improvement budget, then other people can. And he was able to demonstrate that our space, as an example of what could be possible within the Empire State Building, could be built out in a very energy efficient way in a trophy building. You know, so this isn't a brand new building. It's a building that's been around since the Great Depression. Now, concurrently, he was also looking at the base building, and since we received our LEED Platinum plaque, Tony has received a LEED Gold plaque for the renovation of the building core and shell. Okay, so value at the building scale can go, the space that I just talked about at the Empire State Building is tenant improvement, so that's at an office scale. If we look at economic performance at a building scale, I'm going to, in a sense, scale jump to a different metric. How many of you all have heard of the Living Building Challenge? Have you heard? Oh, there are a few brave souls. the Living Building Challenge was delivered to market in 2006. It was the Cascadia chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council that came up with this. And even though, yes, I am incoming chair of the U.S. Green Building Council, this is not really a competing metric to LEED. It's an aspirational metric. The Living Building Challenge is way out over the tips of their skis. They are really looking at more disruptive technology, and they're looking at how you can deliver to market a zero net energy, zero net water, zero net wastewater building. And we are currently in the process of working on a job, the Oregon Sustainability Center, which will be built in Portland, which is where I just flew in from this morning. And this building is being developed not just to prove that you can create a near market value, mid-rise urban building, but it's being used as a catalyst for market transformation from a regional scale, because they want this building to catalyze the development of essentially a Silicon Valley for green building services. So there are lots of different dimensions behind this particular building. And I would encourage you guys to go online, in addition, of course, to hanging out on USGBC.org, the International Living Future Institute, which is an umbrella organization under which the pretty orange flower sits, is a really inspirational group, and they have lots of leading edge ideas which really help LEED, because they're in a much lighter position. They can do things that are much more provocative. So the building scale really isn't enough. Let's take a look at the portfolio scale if we're really going to get to market transformation. USGBC's mission is green buildings for everyone within a generation, and LEED is the tool that was created to do that. But how do you really move the curve? You have an initial strategy. Maybe you're a fairly green person. You're not going to, let's go back to this for just a minute. You're not a slow riser. You're not a lawbreaker. That's the little red piece on the left-hand side. You might even be in a leadership position on the right side of the large mass of about 70% of the buildings that are really just being built to code. But you know, you have a strategy, and maybe you pick LEED as a metric to measure your strategy, but where are you really? So let's say that you can harvest lots of information, and now there are 1.6 billion square feet of space that is LEED certified. And with that information, let's see what you can do. You can actually track and see how you stack up. And mining data, you can now make a more informed strategy. So you can decide that you want to be a leader. You might want to avoid the potential risk of the future cost of water or energy. And now look what you've just done. You've just transformed the market. And other people will follow. And they'll help move the curve that you've just advanced. So here we have the power of data that is converted into knowledge that is moving the market. And so in the next year or two, you're going to be seeing within USGBC a great deal of product that's going to be hitting the market that will allow you to make more informed decisions. The Green Building Information Gateway is already in pilot. And what that does is it maps all of the LEED projects. This is actually available in an iPad or iPhone app through the Apple Store, where you can see all the LEED buildings in the country. This is just mapped for the U.S. now. You can zone into your area. Here we are in the U.S. Here we are in Washington, D.C. And the different colors indicate the different levels of LEED. And if you tap on the bubble, you can bring up that little nutrition chart that tells you about a specific building. And then you can begin to compare. So you can see how you stack up within the context of the nation, or you can change and take a look at how you stack up within your own region. And essentially, this is using data to inform people so that they can make more informed decisions about how they manage their portfolio. In particular, we're anticipating that people that have large portfolios will take a look at this, or even individuals who are looking at leasing space and they want to have a feel for what is market standard and where they want to stack up. I'm going to scale jump once again here, and I want to talk about value at the regional scale. Remember how I talked about the Oregon Sustainability Center looking to sort of incubate a regional industry around green building. Well, that building sits right in the middle of the Portland State University Eco-District, and they just recently renamed it SOMA because it's more like MoMA. It sounds cooler, but all the slides are old, and so we're going to call it the Portland State University Eco-District. And what an eco-district is doing is it's saying, at the next larger scale, we can get efficiencies that we can't get at the building scale. They force us to look beyond traditional boundaries and to optimize systems at the appropriate scale. And so essentially what you're asked to do is you're asked to take a look at what the center of gravity is for a certain system, whether it's water, whether it's wastewater, whether it's energy production, and then figure out what the center of gravity is for that component and let the edges be a little bit soft, because each one is sort of a different circle or a different region that overlays the region. And there's several really, for example, in the Portland State University Eco-District, there are lots of really elegant gravity-fed water systems that have been designed that are now emanating from a central source. But once the original water is distributed, and I know you'd be really interested in this, how do you capture it so that the water then doesn't go down the drain, so that you can reuse it? And so here you have an opportunity to reuse water as gray water so that it has a second life. And if you have this opportunity and you have a mix of different building types, then you can actually have the symbiotic relationship between building types. And that also, of course, is true for electricity. So you can take these overlapping systems and you can transfer value actually across property lines. So yesterday I was in Portland at the Eco-District Summit, and we were talking a lot about what the policy challenges are around this, as rugged Americans were sort of typically engaged in interest that revolves around our piece of property and what happens on our piece of property. But as we move forward with sustainability and we start looking at energy systems and water systems and optimizing those, I think we're going to see a very different way of interacting, not just on a building by building basis, but on a neighborhood basis. And so jumping now to the national scale, Andrew had asked me to talk a little bit about national policy. On the heels of Obama's commitment in his Win the Future State of the Union address, the Better Building Initiative was rolled out. And what the Better Building Initiative intends to do is to catalyze private sector funding to upgrade existing buildings. At any given time, 99% of the buildings that we address are existing buildings. So we really do need to get that right. And what this initiative is asking the private sector to do is to create alliances and to create jobs. And the language also, of course, talks about energy independence and national security, but it's intended to catalyze private sector investment. And there are about a dozen companies now that have Lead for Existing Building programs that are around retrofitting and repositioning existing buildings. Now, if LEED was the initial, tool that was used, now there are many other tools that USGBC is using to transform the market. And one that I particularly like is the Center for Green Schools. About 2.5 years ago, the USGBC was sort of banging their head up against a wall trying to figure out how we were going to move Congress forward and how we were going to encourage an adoption of green buildings on both sides of the aisle. And bipartisan doesn't even exist in the dictionary these days. So how do you do that, especially around a lightning rod issue like sustainability or, God forbid, global warming? So what USGBC realized is that if they were to create a caucus for green schools, that nobody wouldn't like green schools, right? I can see that there's some people in here who are old enough like me to remember Sara Lee commercials, right? Nobody doesn't like Sara Lee. Well, in fact, nobody didn't like green schools. Everybody loved them. And what that did is it created an opportunity in a very bipartisan way to get people talking about green buildings. And from this discussion about green buildings and green schools grew the Center for Green Schools. And so USGBC now has a whole number of strategic alliances that are about not only greening the schools, but educating the students and using the schools as part of the curriculum. And now all of a sudden it begins to impact, of course, the parents because you have PTA. And now we have a real ball game because now we're actually influencing the neighborhoods that in the future could become the eco-districts. And there are all kinds of great resources, and I really encourage you guys to go online and check that out. If you have kids in school or grandkids in school, they're great resources there. I'm just going to flip through these slides because you had an opportunity to listen to Jake this morning, and he can run circles around me. But I do want to close with this notion that in addition to looking at policy at broad scales, we also need to begin to, on a more micro level, begin to analyze how we can tie building performance to business performance, because it's not just enough to say that we want to have a green building. If you can't make the economic case for it, if you can't make the value argument for it, and then ultimately the brass ring really is to tie the business performance to the building performance so that you can make really informed business decisions. And so these are just some images. Jake might have shown you some that are similar. Essentially what our mission critical team is doing is they're taking the built environment and they are, through the magic of BIM technology, modeling it and embodying in the BIM models is a great deal of rich material so that you have all of your resource material essentially in the model, and you can, on a real-time basis, see how your building is running. But then if you can overlay, through the magic of Pi, other systems, business analytics systems, you have an opportunity to begin to connect the dots. And we have done this successfully in data centers. We're also looking at other building types. We're looking at a major telecommunication company where we have an opportunity to connect the business information with the building information. And once you start tying this building performance to business performance, here in a very graphic, intuitive way, you can begin to have a sense of how your building is supporting your business. And these dials were custom designed for this particular organization so that they could aggregate information of their entire portfolio of data centers nationwide and then map the performance to their key performance indicators. So this helps them with their strategic planning, and they can make, again, more informed decisions. And I think that I'll close with this. We have talked a lot about building. We've talked a lot about business. We talk about water. We talk about energy. These are things that are measurable. They're easy to measure. It's much more difficult to measure human productivity. But that really is the greatest opportunity for economic advancement from a business standpoint. USGBC put together this little diagram a few years back, and what it is attempting to say is that for a $4 investment on a per square foot basis, you have the opportunity, by creating a much healthier building, a building with natural light, a building where people want to work, and if you provide space that allows them to actually do their best work, if you enhance productivity, then you actually have a much greater return on your investment than you do even by enhancing energy, which of course is important in the context of global warming, but it only has a minor impact. If you can enhance productivity, then you really have achieved something phenomenal. And what we've found at Skanska is that even though it's very difficult to come up with a metric like water or energy, in the 3 years that we've occupied our space at the Empire State Building, our sick leave has dropped by 15 to 18%, depending on how you measure it. And you could say, well, yeah, Beth, that's nice. We've been through a really nasty recession and people are showing up sick because they don't want to lose their jobs. But even if you discount that number by half, the impact of not only having people productive in the office, and then you can anticipate that there's also a corollary benefit in terms of reduced healthcare costs, that healthy buildings, when you look at environmental performance, along with water performance and energy performance, is really the trifecta that we have to analyze, and this is exactly what LEED is endeavoring to do within their rating system. Thank you.